Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm Harry de Cosmo, freelance football journalist for BBC Sport and others, and I'm here to react to Newcastle United 1, Manchester City 0. What a performance for Newcastle in the second half. I think it was a very strange game overall. Newcastle were pretty abject in the first half. I think Manchester City dominated the ball, and although Newcastle had that really good chance through Jacob Murphy at the end, there was a real sense that Man City just needed to step it up a bit more in the second half, and they'd easily coast the victory that I think most people, when you looked at the starting 11s, probably thought were most likely. I think Newcastle going into the game with Jamal Lascelles and Paul Dummett at the back, you don't really have too many, with all due respect to those players, you don't really have too many hopes when Julian Alvarez and Jack Grealish are in the attack. But overall, I think Newcastle deserved the victory just on the sheer dominance of that second half display. I don't really know what happened at half time. Completely Jekyll and Hyde performance overall. It was St James's Park at its rocking best, and they took the lead through Alexander Isak and never really looked back. And the bizarre thing for me from a City perspective is that it looked like they weren't really too fussed about the game. It's odd to say that, but if you listen to what Pep Guardiola was saying before the game about having to play a really weakened side and potentially playing himself, I know that, as I mentioned in the preview, Mateo Kovacic, Calvin Phillips, Jack Grealish are not exactly weak players, but there's a sense that there wasn't that much drive from Man City, especially after Newcastle stepped up in the second half. They didn't do enough to chase them down and get themselves back into the game. But overall, Newcastle fully deserved the victory, despite that first half performance, which I don't really know how to explain. It was very flat and very sort of passive. The game lacked, the whole team seemed to lack belief, except Tino Livramento, who I think deserves his own mention for how good he was in this game. First start for Newcastle, first start for in a new club at a new stadium in that environment, marking Jack Grealish and then Jeremy Doku in the second half, and he pocketed them both. That's the really positive thing. And I think that to come in the situation that he's in, obviously just still hasn't had that many minutes since he had that really long-term shattering injury to his knee last season, and to come in and put that performance in the first game since May 2022, where Kieran Trippier didn't appear at all. There's this sense that Newcastle are really reliant on Kieran Trippier, and the reason that Tino Livramento has come in is to take that mantle on from Kieran Trippier. There started to be a little bit of doubt about what Newcastle have done over recent weeks because of the sort of difficult start and Sandro Tonali's issues. Was he the right signing? There were bigger problems on the pitch than looking for a backup for Kieran Trippier. But actually, I think he's proven himself and proven exactly why Newcastle bought him. I mean, Trippier not being there last season would have been an absolutely huge issue, and yet he came in and he wasn't really missed because of the way Tino Livramento performed, going defensively and going forward as well. It showed just how important he could be going forward. That Newcastle have a deputy in that position who is not only a good player, but could probably play for most teams in the Premier League outside of the top six. And I think that's a really good position to be in. At the age of 20 as well, he's only going to get better. And it was a difficult night for Lewis Hall, who did okay in the first half. Louis Miley, obviously, in midfield as well, who Eddie Howe was really complimentary of after the game. So, he deserved his experience and he'll take that experience. And I think that's absolutely right. But the game changed when Bruno Guimaraes came on and when Anthony Gordon came on, and that shows just how important those players are at the moment. I mean, Bruno looks back to his best, as we've said, over the last few games since Brentford, Milan, and now obviously Sheffield United. And then the second half here, he looked absolutely imperious at times. And then Anthony Gordon, just if the confidence is flowing through him, he looks like an absolutely superb. He looks like a different player, really. When Alexander Isak scored and the levels went up, Manchester City just couldn't handle Newcastle. Joe Linton as well, absolutely superb. Came back into the team after a few weeks out injured. Obviously had some issues with his knee, and I think that Newcastle look back to their best. They look really strong, and they'll be a force for anybody. They've got Burnley at home next up, which is a really important game to get back in that sort of, as I mentioned, that top six picture before PSG come to town with or without Kylian Mbappe next week in the Champions League. In terms of the draw, Newcastle United did get a very easy reward for beating Man City. They go to Manchester United away at Old Trafford at the end of October. That's continues a really difficult line of teams that Newcastle have been drawn against in all cup competitions this season, obviously with Milan, PSG, Dortmund, Man City and now Man United. It's not an easy run, but if Newcastle are going to do it, they're going to do it the hard way, and they should be confident of a victory at Old Trafford. I mean, Manchester United have not been at their best this season. They've got so many off-field problems as well that there's a lot to take advantage of. But I think it is while Newcastle can be confident of a victory, I think there is a sort of sense that it's another big game occasion. It's another game where they have to raise their levels, and obviously they would have to raise their levels if it was Exeter or Mansfield or Port Vale at home as well. But there's a sense that this game is another one where there's going to be a lot of media attention. There's going to be a different sort of mentality and a lot of atmosphere around it that gives it a different feel. And when you've got Dortmund coming up after that, and you've got Arsenal and you've got Chelsea in the weeks after that as well, absolutely superb performance by Newcastle in the second half. It was a completely bizarre game, and I think they've got a really good chance of going far in the cup if they perform like they did in the second half. I think it really shows how important the spine of that team is to how successful Newcastle are, because Gordon and Bruno and Isak and Joe Linton all performed really well. Only really Livramento came in and made an impact. I think it shows how key those sort of core players are to Newcastle going forward, which is a bit of a worry in a sense that they'll be needed for most of the big games. There is a little bit of an injury concern over Alexander Isak, who came off, and a bit of an injury concern over Bruno Guimaraes as well. We'll see if they're fit for Burnley. I'll be back on Friday to look forward to that game, and I'll see you then. Please continue to like, share and subscribe if you like what you hear, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.